Um, so Jackson, you want to share? Jackson Miller has been with us for the last 2 months?
9 weeks?
8 weeks.
8 weeks.
Yep.
And it's gone by way fast.
Too fast.
But he's been a godsend. Just his presence on the altar and just among us. So take it over. You've got all the time in the world.
Yeah, so kind of as Father Ben said, looking out at the crowd, I see lots of familiar faces, so I'm really grateful for that. So one of the things I had done in the last Back to Galilee in Lansing was share a bit of my vocation story. If you haven't heard that from me, I'll kind of, just kind of try to keep it brief, especially for those who have heard it 5 times now already. Kind of keep it in broad strokes overall, but maybe pinpoint kind of a couple of key moments, especially with this like Back to Galilee theme, recalling, those key moments, those God winks. As I think that's a perfectly fine terminology. And then maybe just cover a little bit of the seminary journey as well, and what's next for me. Again, sorry if you've heard that 5 times already. And then lastly, I wanted to save a little bit of time just to talk about the vocation to celibacy, just with some thoughts and quotes about that. Celibacy, very, very similar to virginity, just of course meaning that we, for someone who remains unmarried for their whole life through a vow or a promise that they take. I think it's just could be good to talk about and recognize that celibacy is something that's not just for priests, and it's also not just giving up marriage and family. It's not just like, oh man, I gotta sacrifice this in order to be a priest, but it is really a beautiful form of Christian life in itself, and one that men who are discerning priesthood are also discerning celibacy, and they're very excited about. And it's also something that's for more than just priests, for men and women to discern. So yeah, just little background. Again, you may have heard this, but I come from Cedar Rapids, from a Catholic family that I grew up in there, going to Catholic schools and Catholic church. So my father is here in the audience, so if he can raise his hand, it's Matt Miller. If you're familiar with coming up just to visit and see really just how, in fact, beautiful that the driftless region of Iowa really is. So I think it's one of Iowa's best kept secrets, I think. So I won't try to tell too many people so that it can maintain the peace up here. And so, yeah, just grew up in a loving Catholic family that I'm thankful for. Was baptized and went to elementary school at All Saints. I also consider Immaculate Conception and St. Wenceslas in downtown CR to be homes for me. Growing up, I'm very thankful for kind of a consistent practice of the Catholic faith that I had, and it was never something, I guess I would say, that I fully drifted away from or anything. Although I would look back and say that, probably that similar to what Mariah and Grace and Savannah have shared, I think is very common for young people growing up, is that it was hard for me to conceive of or kind of have or grow, develop a personal relationship with God. As something that came later through some great experiences. So I remember in elementary school, kind of looking up to the priest, and for a little bit of time thinking I wanted to be a priest. That was Father Dave O'Connor who baptized me. So he was Father Ben's pastor in Mason City there in his previous assignment. Father Dave was baptized by Father Donald Hawes, who's kind of up here. So kind of been cool to reconnect or connect with for the first time with Father Donald Hawes, kind of a spiritual grandfather for me. So that's been a very beautiful thing too. Growing up, did a lot of the typical things. My main activities were baseball, football, track and field, and choir. A lot of experiences I get to share with Father Ben too, especially being on the Xavier football team. So we have lots of stories about all the things that our coaches yelled at us every day for 4 years. And I would say when it comes to growing in terms of our relationship with God, it first came through the intellectual side. Just really found that I was interested in my theology classes and learning more about God and the church and asking questions. So I found myself on my free time, even while I was playing video games or things like that, listening to or watching videos about the Catholic faith. It was later and just over time through various experiences, especially through high school, that I had encounters with God's deep love for me that drew me in deeper and deeper. One that I'd like to share is kind of the most subtle, almost the most boring and non-interesting, but maybe it was one of the most impactful kinds of experiences, where I recall as a lifeguard, that was my summer job, on the most boring lifeguarding days, where it was cloudy, 70 degrees maybe a little bit rainy, and there was about 3 people in the pool. I just remembered kind of being bored and having to figure out something to think about while I'm sitting up in the guard chair. And somehow, kind of almost out of nowhere, I would begin to hum some of the church songs that we would sing on Sunday that were just kind of resonating in me. And I would just hum these to myself. And through that, came to sense how much God deeply loved me. I really, really understood God's love for me and his mercy that he had. And so this kind of experience caused me to pray without even intending it. And in my senior year of high school, I remember kind of thinking about the priesthood. One priest that I looked up to in high school was Father Chris Padaski, who previously has been assigned to Postville, Monona, and McGregor, and now is in New Hampton, as well as Charles City, where I knew that he was, just from experience of altar serving with him, that I knew that he was a man of deep prayer, praying especially before Mass silently. And so it caused me to kind of appreciate the priesthood at an arm's length and think, if God was calling me to be a priest, which he's not, that would be a cool life, hypothetically. But I think it was that openness and that appreciation that led me to be able to discern my vocation my freshman year of college, where I went to the University of Iowa and found myself getting really involved at the Newman Center there, doing things like going to daily Mass where I didn't plan on it, going into college, and even praying the rosary, walking across campus from class on my way to Mass. Father Joseph would hear that and would say, "Yes, you are praying for the conversion of the sinful people of Iowa City." That's true. To that I would say, "Yes, but as a fellow Hawkeye." And it was in this environment that I found myself going from that kind of arm's length appreciation to beginning to actually daydream about being a priest and putting myself in the position of a priest. And over about 2 months, this really just grew and intensified and eventually became so intense that it was something I could no longer ignore and that really burst out of me. And so I finally had to officially explicitly pray about this and talk to other people. So just after some consultation with family members, friends that I was making, priest mentors, and with the Lord in prayer, it just became very, very clear that I desired to be a priest, that others saw it in me, and that I think I had a call from God. And so, in the fall of 2020, entered the seminary for the Archdiocese of Dubuque, and spent my first 3 years at Loras College, engaging especially in studies, really developing a prayer life, just developing brotherhood and friendship with the other seminarians, something I'm very grateful for, and then beginning to get our feet wet in ministry through yearly little parish assignments and then summer assignments as well. The last 3 years, I've been at Mundelein Seminary, north of Chicago, studying not philosophy but theology, and then having even more just intense and really much more closer preparation for ordained ministry, continuing parish assignments. After this, after a couple of weeks at home, I'll be going back to Mundelein for my last semester, and then looking ahead to graduating in December, being ordained a deacon this December, the Saturday before Christmas. So you're all welcome. 10 a.m., Saturday before Christmas, Cathedral of St. Raphael. I'll have a deacon assignment in a pastorate from January to about May. And then the last Saturday of June, once again, 10 a.m., Cathedral of St. Raphael. You're more than welcome. would be my priest ordination date. Within a couple weeks after that would be when I would begin my priest assignment at a pastorate, which we'll find out where that is eventually. And so yeah, that's just kind of some broad strokes. And so now just to talk a little bit about celibacy, just from some wisdom that I've I've been able to hear through seminary, and just some of my own experience about what being an unmarried, promised Christian means. So I think for a lot of us, mostly the only celibates that we know of on a daily basis or a regular basis are the priests in our towns and at our parishes. Maybe we've possibly known religious sisters at our parishes. I know I've heard a little bit this summer about Sister Mary McCauley, who was down in Monona McGregor in Postville, and sounds like was very instrumental, very deeply involved there. And I don't doubt that there have been sisters here who have done a very similar thing. Also a Franciscan sister who's out east, but is from Wexford originally. But otherwise, it's not very common to know people who have made a promise to be celibate for the rest of their lives, to be unmarried. And with this little talk kind of beefing up celibacy, I don't want to lessen or diminish marriage. I want to also recognize that the vocation to matrimony, that marriages, as we're seeing, are also something that's on the decline, together with other metrics like church attendance and things. That's something I want to encourage as well. There's a Swiss priest of the 20th century, Hans Urs von Balthasar, who is famous for saying, "To love is to make a vow." In other words, that the highest expression of love for another person that we could give is to vow ourselves to that person, and then to daily follow up and be faithful to that vow, whether it's marriage or celibacy in a particular community or context. So in other words, faith, a lot of the same virtues and the habits and the qualities that we need to be good fathers and mothers and husbands and wives are also the same qualities that a virtuous and saintly and holy celibate person ought to have. We find celibacy recommended in the New Testament and Scripture. So I want to read from St. Paul and then from the Gospel of Matthew. This is 1 Corinthians chapter 7. I want you to be free from anxieties. The unmarried man is anxious about the affairs of the Lord, how to please the Lord. But the married man is anxious about worldly affairs, how to please his wife, and his interests are divided. And the unmarried woman or virgin is anxious about the affairs of the Lord, how to be holy in body and spirit. But the married woman is anxious about worldly affairs, how to please her husband. I say this for your own benefit, not to lay any restraint upon you, but to promote good order and to secure your undivided devotion to the Lord. Along a similar vein, Jesus talking about some of the kind of critical issues of marriage. He also talks about the tough issue in teaching on divorce, then goes into being unmarried for the kingdom of heaven. This is Matthew chapter 19. But Jesus said to his disciples, "Not all men can receive this precept, but only those to him whom it is given. For there are eunuchs, unmarried people, who have been so from birth. There are eunuchs who have been made eunuchs by men. And there are eunuchs who have made themselves so for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. He who is able to receive this, let him receive it." There's a priest who was our spiritual director of spiritual formation at Mundelein, a Franciscan named Father Arturo Felix, who said that for him, he saw vowed, professed religious life as the easiest way that he could think of in his desire to become a saint. He said, I wish I could be a lay person and seek to become a saint, but I'm not strong or holy enough to do that. He talked about needing a rule of prayer and being able to depend upon a rule of life and a community of other brothers to be able to support him. It's kind of in contrast to, I know what I've heard a lot of people say to me, that oh gosh, thank you for your vocation. When I think about it, priesthood or celibacy, that's just too hard. There's no way that I could do that. As the scriptures though say, celibacy is not so hard in a way if we approach it with a whole heart, if we're wholehearted about serving the Lord and being devoted to Him. But if we approach celibacy or whatever it is that we vow ourselves to half-heartedly, then it's impossible to be faithful to that vocation. I think a lot of people also are concerned about, looking at people who remain unmarried, especially people who promise celibacy, that they're giving up on something, they're missing out on something, giving up on love. It's not that as celibates that we give up on love, that we're loving differently. I'll say that dioceses and religious orders, when accepting new candidates, they're not looking for people who are trying to get away from family life or aren't interested, thinking like, oh, a husband or a wife, nah, that's too much work, or, raising kids, nope, I don't want to be around them. They're actually not interested in accepting people who have that kind of attitude. They want people who, again, are willing to lay down their lives for a community of people. People also worry that as celibates that we're going to be lonely. There's a priest who was speaking to a group of seminarians. Many of my friends were there, just talking about, celibacy as an aspect of priesthood. And he says, as you go into priesthood, the way that your romantic love is going to take shape is going to largely consist of sitting on a wooden bench, staring at a golden box in a church with a red lamp next to it. And parishioners are going to see you, and they're going to bake you cookies because they see you and they think that you're lonely. But you're not lonely, because you see what they may not see as easily, namely, that God is present to you, that you are not alone, and that you are deeply and profoundly loved. Now, I will still accept cookies. And I know that people either make us food or bring us desserts, not simply because it's out of pity, but sometimes I have, gotten a little bit of that sense some of the time. And so it's just kind of a funny story that I was really glad to hear and like to share. And I also want to say, too, that even though we really heavily rely on God, and that's the way that our life takes shape, priests and anybody who's unmarried and celibate, just like anybody, still needs human relationships. And so, I definitely would encourage you, if this is something you haven't done, invite your priests to dinner, invite them to go kayaking on the Mississippi River, or to whatever it might be. Don't just assume that they're too busy. I think it is something, hopefully we'll look down the road and fit it into our schedules, but it really is something that I think is a joy for us and is very life-giving for us to participate in the family of our parish community. Now, looking specifically at religious orders, there's kind of two sides of them that we can look at that have celibate people. One of them, some religious orders tend to be more active, and they're able to do a lot of great works. And these might be religious, for example, sisters who are stationed at a parish, or religious brothers and sisters who run institutions, such as teaching and nursing and engaging in service to the poor. But I think it's also important, when asking like the why of celibacy, especially for priests or others, it's not just so that we can, we don't have a family to take care of, so we have more time to do stuff. Certainly there's something there, but it's more about that we're able to give ourselves wholeheartedly in devotion to God and to avail ourselves to God, and then to relate to the Christian community as family members. And that is why religious brothers and sisters take the name, and we call them brother so-and-so and sister so-and-so. And the priest is called father so-and-so as a father to the community. And sisters who exercise motherly roles are called mother because they are key family members to the Christian community in the local area. Now, other orders have a little bit more of a contemplative side, more devoted to prayer. There's a story of one more contemplative nun who needed to fundraise a little bit for her small religious community. And she said it was hard to exactly say what they did and hard to sell their religious order because, when they were fundraising and talking to people, maybe people who were business owners or things like that, and they asked them, well, what does your religious order do? What do they contribute to the community? And this particular religious said, well, not really anything. To be honest, I'm perfectly useless. And that's exactly the point of my life, is that my life is dedicated not to any particular works, but simply to praising God. And the church has held up this particular form of life, a life totally of prayer, as a testament to the fact that God is enough for us, and that before we do anything, we have immense dignity, and that God says to us before we do anything that you are very good, and that God calls us to lives of holiness. Now, again, looking kind of out at the crowds, I see mostly family people. So I guess this couldn't really be a fervorino for, hey, you should try being a religious brother or sister. So what does this mean for us as family members in this Christian community here in this pastorate? Well, one thing I think is that the vocations can teach us about each other. When I, as an aspiring celibate, look at married persons, married couples, people in families, their marriage and the way that they live out their vows shows me, one, how to give of my life, how to live out the vows that I'm going to make on a daily basis, in season and out of season, when it's easy and when it's hard. They also show me that God's love is like that of a spouse, that Christ loves the church like a husband loves his wife, and that I should endeavor to love the church as a good husband would love his wife with devotion. And I think on the flip side, celibacy can show married persons and people in families that God is our first love. That is, it is God who has loved us first. Now, so I guess a couple of questions I want to just leave you with then. And one would be just for reflection, what do the celibates and the unmarried persons that you know personally, for example, Father Joseph, Father Philip, and Father Ben, what do they teach you about how to love God and how to love your neighbor? And then finally, what can I do to encourage all vocations to laying down our lives in love and in service of others, whether that be holy matrimony or to celibacy, to the boys and the girls of my life. Lastly, just want to thank you very much for your great welcome, especially just throughout this whole summer. You've just been so kind to me, and I've been welcomed into so many environments and conversations, and it's really just been a joy, just been these brief 8 weeks here. I will ask you to please pray for me and my classmates as we approach ordination, and know that I'll continue to keep you all in my prayers as we head back to seminary and head to ordination. I will keep this whole area and all of you in a very, very fond place in my heart. So thank you, and God bless you all.